Good morning. How's everybody doing? Good. Hopefully you're all well rested with the extra hour of sleep that we got. Or for those of us who wake up at the same time every day, you just woke up an hour earlier than normal. Uh, that's what happened to me today. But anyway, it's good to see everyone here and that you showed up on time. And we're just sitting around for an hour waiting on everybody. But it's good to be here together worshiping God. Before we get started, let's go to God in prayer. God, thank you so much for today. Thank you so much for rest. Times when we can rejuvenate, recharge our batteries, and I just thank you so much for Sabbath, that you gave us that as a gift. Times when we can rest and relax and recharge. God, thank you so much for today and for everyone here. And I just pray that this message this morning would help us to raise our kids, help us to, if we have grandkids, assist our kids in raising their kids. If we don't have kids yet, help us to learn how to raise kids to follow you before we embark on that journey. God, we just thank you so much for kids, the kids in our life, the kids in this church, and I pray that you would help us all to raise them up, to influence them, to follow you for the rest of their life. And it's in your name I pray. Amen. As we get started this morning, do me a favor and lean over to the person next to you or someone close by and tell them something that your parents always told you that just annoyed you to no end. I know there's got to be something, your face is going to get stuck like that, or eat your vegetables, whatever it was. Share that with the person close by. All right, what were some things that you shared? Anybody want to shout it out?
Don't throw Q-tips in the toilet.
Don't throw Q-tips in the toilet. All right. Anything else? This is going to hurt me worse than it's going to hurt you. That's one I heard when I grew up. Yep. I don't think it did. Any others?
My mother always said it was cat fur to make kitten britches when we'd ask her what she had.
I didn't catch all that.
She would say it was cat fur to make kitten britches when we'd ask her what was in the bag.
Oh, okay. All right. I think that's a Southern saying. All right. As a relatively new parent, my oldest son is 5. I found myself saying some things to my kids that my parents said to me. And I didn't really like it when my parents said those things to me, but as a parent, I understand why they did. Parents want what's best for their kids, right? They want them to grow and to learn and to make wise choices, to be safe. They want them to be better versions of themselves. Parents want to impart their wisdom upon their children and try to help them avoid the same mistakes that they made. That is, in general, what I think that most every parent wants. But the problem with that is the kids don't come with instruction manuals, right? Landon, for instance, he was born on January 14th, 2016, and only 3 days later, on June 17th, I carried him downstairs from our hospital room, out the door in his car, or he was in his car seat. I walked him out the door, put him in the back seat of our car. Jessica got in the back seat there with him. I got in the driver's seat, and before I even started the car, I thought to myself, how are these people who work in this hospital allowed to just let anybody walk out of the hospital with babies? I mean, up until that point, I'd never taken care of a baby. I didn't know what I was doing. And they just let me just walk out and drive away with a baby. That seems like a little irresponsible, don't you think? that they would just let anyone take just take a baby away. That drive home, I drove about 15 miles per hour. Going home, I was scared out of my mind, but we figured it out. But as any experienced parent knows, even if you get it figured out, the rules keep changing. Just when you think you have this parenting thing down, the kid grows up into another phase of childhood, and all the things that you thought you knew all of a sudden are different. And they change. And you have to adapt, and you have to keep figuring it out, right? Parenting is tough, and there isn't an instruction manual to tell you exactly what you need to do in every single phase of a child's life. What you are supposed to do in order to make sure that they turn out okay. It's difficult to know the right thing to do as a parent. But if you teach them to follow Christ, they will grow up to make wise choices, and they will be the better version of yourself that you're hoping they'll become. Teaching them to follow Christ when they are young will have a dramatic effect on their life as they grow up. Look at what it says at Proverbs 22:6. I particularly like how it's explained in the Amplified Bible version. Train up a child in the way he should go, teaching him to seek God's wisdom and will for his abilities and talents. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Train up a child to seek God's wisdom and God's will, and he will do that for the rest of his life. That's what we typically think of when we think about parenting. Teach them when they're young so that when they grow up, they'll be successful. They'll do the right things. They'll might make wise choices. But what we teach them when they're young will also help them right now. It will help them be successful right now. It will give them opportunities to do something significant right now. Something maybe even heroic. There were some kids in the Bible who did significant things, heroic things. And they did them while they were still young. A lot of times we don't expect kids to do significant things. But if we teach them to follow Christ, they just might become unexpected heroes. There's going to be 3 kids that we're going to look at, their stories, over the next few weeks. And we're going to talk about how they were unexpected heroes because of the way that they were raised and the godly influences in their life. Today we're starting a brand new sermon series called Unexpected Heroes. And this series is about parenting. And if you're not currently a parent with kids under the age of 18, I don't want you to tune me out because hopefully one day maybe you will have kids, or maybe your kids have already went off and started lives of their own, and maybe you have grandkids, or you will have grandkids soon, and you have the ability to influence those kids as well. And even if you don't have kids or grandkids, our church has kids, and you can still be a godly influence in their life. And so I pray that you don't just tune me out during this series. This is good for all of us to hear. But we're going to be looking at 3 kids who did significant things for God. They were David, Josiah, and Esther. And this morning we're going to talk about the heroics of David. David would grow up to become king of Israel. Because of his love and his devotion for God, God would make a covenant with him, a promise. God promised to forever have a descendant, one of David's descendants, on the throne of Israel. This covenant promise was fulfilled in Jesus Christ, who sits on the throne of heaven today. But David didn't just become a hero of Israel when he became king. He became king when he was 30 years old. He was a hero long before that. David's heroic tale is found at 1 Samuel 17. If you have your Bibles, that's where the story we're going to be looking at is found, 1 Samuel 17. And that's where we're going to be camping out this morning. But David was the youngest of 8 brothers. His 3 oldest brothers had been conscripted into the Israelite army. And so we know because of that, they were at least 20 years old. Numbers 13 tells us that kids under the age of 20 were not allowed, they're not old enough to go to war. So his oldest 3 brothers were at least 20. But David also had 4 older brothers that were not at war. So we know that they were younger than 20. David, being the youngest of them, was in all likelihood around the age of 15 when this story took place. It was possible that he was even as young as 10 to 12 years old. But David lived in the town of Bethlehem with his brothers and his father Jesse. His father owned a flock of sheep, and David would watch those sheep out in the fields. It's pretty boring out in the fields as a young boy all by yourself, right? And so David would occupy his time, just like any other boy, by playing around. Most likely, he spent a fairly large amount of time practicing with a sling out in the fields. I'm sure that he was like most young boys, out in the field with a sling, maybe aiming at birds or squirrels or just at trees. But he practiced so much as a kid that he got really good with it. So good that he was able to fend off both a lion and a bear. The lion, on 2 separate instances, a lion and a bear came and tried to steal sheep from the flock, and he fought them both off by using his sling to injure them, and then his shepherd's staff to beat them to death. The sling that David used was more than just a child's toy. It was more than just a slingshot. It was an actual weapon of war. Skilled slingers in ancient warfare were extremely deadly, and they could easily turn the tide of any battle. The sling was basically just a rope. It had a handle on one end, and on the other end it was just the piece of rope. And in the middle was a small pouch. So the slinger would hold the handle and the other end of the rope together in one hand, and then place a stone into the pouch, usually about the size of an egg. And the slinger would then spin the sling, and skilled slingers could get the rope spinning at over 1,000 RPMs. And then the slinger would release the end of the rope that did not have the handle, and it would project the stone toward the target. Much like a professional baseball player, if a highly skilled soldier just took a stone and threw it, he could probably throw the stone at 80, 90, maybe even 100 miles per hour. A professional baseball player can easily touch 90, and the best of the best can throw it at over 100. But with the sling, the soldier could hurl a stone upwards of 300 miles per hour. There have been stones found at ancient battle sites in Syria that had been grinded to a point, making them as deadly as armor-piercing bullets. One stone that was found had pierced through a brick wall. That's how fast these stones were traveling. Slingers were used in ancient warfare right alongside archers. But slingers were far more accurate and the stones were far more aerodynamic than arrows, enabling them to fly over longer distances. There were some slingers estimated to be able to hit a man from a quarter mile away. This was the sling that David had practiced using his entire childhood. Ancient sources say that kids started training with slings as early as 5 years old. This little shepherd boy had all the skills needed to become an unexpected hero. Let me set the stage for this story found at 1 Samuel chapter 17. Around 1200 BC, 1200 years before Christ, a combination of natural disasters and wars caused what historians call the Late Bronze Age collapse. This caused a mass migration of people out of Europe, across the Mediterranean to Egypt and to the southwestern coast of Israel. The people that settled along the region now known today as the Gaza Strip, the southwestern coast of Israel, the people that settled along this coast were called Philistines. And under the reign of King Saul, the Israelites and the Philistines went to war. But the war came to a standstill at the Valley of Elah. This Valley of Elah was southwest of the city of Jerusalem, and the Philistines had set up their camp on one hill, and the Israelites set up their camp on the opposite hill, with the valley in between. And neither side would dare advance toward the other, because they would have to go down into the valley in order to do so. Going down into the valley would mean giving up the high ground. And so both armies remained on their respective hills for 40 days. During this 40 days, the Philistines employed psychological warfare. They sent down their giant Goliath into the valley. Author Malcolm Gladwell has proposed that Goliath may have suffered from a condition called hydranencephaly, where fluid-filled sacs develop around the brain and often push on the pituitary gland, causing abnormal growth. Goliath stood over 9 feet tall. This was the case for Robert Wadlow. He was the tallest man in modern recorded history. He stood at 8 feet 11. He had this condition, hydranencephaly. This condition would have caused abnormal levels of human growth hormone to be released, allowing him to develop incredible strength. His armor weighed about 125 pounds. His spear was 12 feet long. I'm 6'3", so it's basically twice as tall as me. And at the tip of his spear was a 15-pound iron tip. The tip alone was about the size of a normal man's shield. This would have been an extremely intimidating man. Every single day, the Philistines sent Goliath down into the valley to shout up at the Israelites, daring them to send down their best hand-to-hand fighter to fight him. King Saul, the Bible tells us that he was chosen as king because he was head and shoulders above everyone in the nation of Israel, primarily because he was the biggest and the baddest in all of the land. That's why they wanted him as their king. Most estimates place King Saul between 6'6" and 7 feet tall. He was your average NBA player. But not even King Saul was brave enough to go down into the valley and face the giant Goliath. So that's where we are at 1 Samuel. And so let's read together 1 Samuel chapter 17, starting in verse 17. Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are, and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. Early in the morning, David left the flock with a shepherd, loaded up, and set out, as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines, facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran down to the battle lines, and greeted his brothers. As he was talking to them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. When the Israelites saw the man, they ran from him in fear. Jesse had 3 boys out in the battlefield, and undoubtedly he was worried about them, as any parent would be. He wanted to know that they were okay and that nothing had happened to them, so he sent David out to send them a care package. And he instructed David to come back to give him assurance that they were okay. And that's exactly what David did. Jesse trusted his son David enough to send him out. The temptation that parents have is to keep their kids as safe as possible, right? We want to protect them, not let anything happen to them. If they stay in the nest, they're safe, but if they go out into the world, there's danger out there, they might get hurt. So we try to keep them in a little bubble, right? But it's not possible to keep them in a bubble their entire life. We wish that we could do that, right? But we can't. We cannot do that. We have to let them go. Whether it's off to preschool or kindergarten, which is what Landon is in right now, or sending them to middle school or high school, or off to even college. Parents have to let their kids go. But that isn't exactly what Jesse did. He didn't just let David go. He sent David out. There's a difference. Jesse gave David instructions about what to do when he got there. And he sent him out to do it. Raising kids to be unexpected heroes like David requires that we as parents not just let our kids go, but that we send them out. We give them instructions about what to do, and we send them out to do it. By sending them out, instead of just letting them go, you're empowering them. You're telling them that you trust them. That you're telling them that you believe in them. You're telling them that they have what it takes to do something significant. The difference between sending them out and just letting them go is largely what you say to them. The words that you choose to use. For instance, if you're sitting in the car rider line, dropping them off at school, instead of just saying, "Have a good day," say something like, "Be a good friend. Be a good influence. Be a leader." You're giving them instructions about what to do during the day. It's encouraging them to actively engage in the lives of their friends. It's encouraging them to be active during the day and not just passive. They can sit back and they can go through their day. Sure, they might do all their work. They might do it well. They might not get in trouble. But sending them out will encourage them to actively try to be a positive influence in their friends' lives. How much bigger of an impact will they make if they are actively being a good friend, if they're thinking about how they could be a good influence? Send them out. Don't just let them go. This wasn't the first time that Jesse had sent out his son David. in chapter 16 of 1 Samuel, he sent David, his son, into the service of the king, of King Saul, as a musician. Saul had some anxiety and some emotional issues that he was dealing with, and when he heard David play his harp, it calmed him down. And Jesse trusted David, and he sent him out to serve God. Your kids, your grandkids, they're in school. Not just to learn, but to serve God while they're there. By influencing their friends. To be Jesus to their friends. By showing them God's love and how they treat people. And because of the trust that was given to him, the empowerment that he received to go out and do great things, David had the courage to do what nobody else in the Israelite army was willing to do. Let's jump down to verse 32 of this chapter. 1 Samuel 17:32. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Could you imagine this little kid coming up saying, "I'll go fight him"? Saul replied, "You're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a boy. And he's been a fighting man from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Well, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it," this is with his sling, "and rescued the sheep from his mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it with a staff, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." It's a brave boy. When David asserted his intentions of going down to fight Goliath, Saul refused. Because he was just a young boy, right? He thought, just like anyone in their right mind would think, there's no way that this kid is going to stand a chance against the champion of the Philistine army. David's brothers even tried to stop him. But David had confidence. When Saul saw that he wasn't going to be able to stop the boy, he gave him his armor and his sword, doing everything he could to protect him. But Saul, he was an NBA player, and David was just a little kid. He couldn't even walk around with Saul's armor on. Saul and his brothers assumed that David was going to go down into the valley and engage in hand-to-hand combat with Goliath. But David had other plans. He went to a nearby stream, and he picked up 5 stones, placed them in his pouch. David was confident. He knew his ability with the sling. He knew that he was accurate. He knew what he was able to do. But he'd never slung a stone at a giant before, so he didn't know how many stones it was going to take, right? So he grabbed 5 just in case. David was confident. And the reason he was confident was because he was empowered by his dad to go out and do something significant for God. He was empowered to serve God with his abilities. In order to raise unexpected heroes, parents need to send their kids out, but also stoke their dreams, like fanning a flame. All kids have dreams of what they want to become, or what they want to grow up to be, what they want to do. Our temptation as parents is to think that those dreams have to wait. But those dreams don't have to wait until they grow up. They can begin to do those things now. Now, obviously, what they're able to do and what they should do is age dependent, right? It should be age appropriate. But if a kid dreams of, for instance, becoming a doctor, going to medical school and becoming a doctor, what you might do to stoke those dreams for an elementary age kid is going to be different than what you do to stoke those dreams for a high school kid. But as a parent, you want to encourage them to not just dream about what they want to do one day, but what can they do now to move them closer to accomplishing that dream in the future. For an elementary school kid, maybe you befriend a doctor and have them over for dinner, and let your kid ask them a ton of questions about the medical field, about what it's like to be a doctor. Maybe you purchase some medical toys for them to play with. That's stoking that dream, fanning the flames. For a high school student, maybe it's a little bit different. Maybe you actually take them to a hospital, allow them to shadow someone who works there. I remember when I was a junior in high school, and I took a field trip to U of L hospital, or no, U of L medical school with my anatomy class. I had an anatomy class my junior year in high school, and we went to the medical school. I got to see firsthand what med students actually experience. It wasn't until later that how I realized how easily nauseous I get, so it's a good thing I didn't go to medical school. But for someone who wants to be a doctor, that'd be a great way to stoke those dreams. And it's important to stoke your kids' dreams. David went down into the valley to face Goliath with his shepherd's staff and his sling, the same weapons he used against the lion and the bear. When Goliath saw that the Israelites sent down a boy to face him, he mocked him. He mocked the Israelites. But David kept his focus on God because he believed that God would see him through. This is what David said at verse 45. David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head." And that is exactly what David did. He slung his stone into the forehead of Goliath. It had such velocity that it penetrated his skull. This one stone was all it took to kill him. The giant fell, and David ran up and took Goliath's own sword and cut off his head. David never took his eyes off God. He knew where his power came from. He knew who he was serving. Our job as parents or as grandparents is to steer our kids' focus back to God. No matter what they do, no matter where we send them, we want their focus to be on God. And as they grow up, we need to steer their focus back to God. If at any time their focus moves away from God, it is our job to steer it back to God. We want them to know that wherever they are called, whatever they are called to do, they're called to serve God. Whether that's by going to medical school or being an electrician or a teacher, whatever it is, they are to do it for God, for His kingdom. And not just when they grow up. Just like David, they can serve God and they can do significant things for His kingdom right now. If we send them out, if we stoke their dreams, and if we steer their focus back to God, they will become unexpected heroes. But it's hard to raise kids to follow Christ if you yourself don't follow Christ. And so we're going to move into a time of decision where you can make the decision to follow Christ on your own. It is important for us as followers of Christ to help our kids follow Christ, because just like David they face giants. Their giants probably aren't 9 feet tall, but their giants might be a bully. Their giants might be chemistry class. Their giants might be trying to fit in. Whatever it is, they can overcome those giants and do significant things if we raise them to follow Christ. But we ourselves must follow Christ as well. And if you want to make a decision this morning to place your faith in Him, I invite you to come forward. Would you pray with me? God, thank you so much for today, for this story of a great heroic thing that a kid did. So often we dismiss kids and think that, oh, they're just too young right now. They can't really do a whole lot right now. But when they're young, when they're older, maybe they can do great things. But help us to be reminded by this story that our kids, our grandkids, the kids in this church can do great things for you now. And I would pray that you would help all of us to help them do that, to empower them to do that. God, we thank you so much for your grace, for coming into this world and dying for our sins and loving us even when we fail. But I pray that you would help us all to be better parents, to be better grandparents, to be better godly influences in the life of kids, so that they can grow up to follow you. It's in your name I pray. Amen. Would you stand as we sing?